Hello, I'm Arden Strix, and this is a guide to what I consider a realistic process for cutting a mackerel in Hardspace Shipbreaker. When I say realistic, I mean the process still achieves around 97% retrieval and all of the available salvage goals, but will forego a lot of the more tedious tasks for a faster, more enjoyable cut. Having removed the antenna from the outside of the ship, I'm using the structural scanning mode to look for the airlock. I'm removing one of the auxiliary hull panel sections, but not the others.
Airlock depressurizing.
Starting out our cut, the biggest priority is hull pressure. Venting to vacuum in the wrong way can end your salvage faster than cutting into your reactor. It can also start a chain reaction, so it is always best to deal with hull pressure first, if possible. This is an obstruction in the main cabin, which will trap some air pressure behind it, so it's best to remove that now. Right now I'm scanning the main cabin for anything to take note of, anything especially dangerous or explosive, but there doesn't seem to be anything that bad, just some fuel tanks and some coolant tanks. Just having a look around the main cabin to see if there's anything important or any data drives or any helmets. On every mackerel, there are 2 crawl spaces on the port and starboard side. They can be under pressure, not always, but in this case they don't have any hatches or any way to access them other than by venting pressure, which is what we're going to do. Before we pry anything loose in the cabin, we're going to vent this hull pressure. Mackerels have a big, heavy nanocarbon section at the stern side, which we're going to use for this purpose. Here I look for something to grab onto and cut the last cut point to release the back section. If you're having trouble venting hull pressure safely, it's a good rule of thumb to try and use that pressure to separate 2 heavy objects. A release of pressure is a release of energy. So you either spend that energy launching a light nanocarbon panel at ballistic velocity across the shipyard, or you spend it separating 2 heavy hull sections.
Processing object. Applying credits to account.
With hull pressure vented, the next priority is to gain better access to the main cabin. I do a quick scan and realize I still have to cycle the airlock to get rid of some remaining hull pressure.
Airlock depressurizing.
The fuel lines feeding the nacelles still have fuel in them, so we flush that now. The laser cutter in Hardspace doesn't operate how you think it might. In terms of the game engine, the laser only cuts what you place your reticule on. So the animation might show you cutting something to the right, but if your reticule is not placed on that object, it will not be cut. I now see that we have a leaking coolant tank directly attached to the bridge of the ship. This isn't a major issue, but it could cause some problems if we aren't mindful of it later. Unfortunately, it's nearly full, so we're going to leave it here for now. Notice that I'm not touching any of the fuel lines. Being very careful not to cut the fuel tank behind the cut body. This tank is heavy with fuel, so we use a tether to bring it to the barge. I see that the nacelles are still attached to the hull, so we move to detach them now.
Salvage deposit confirmed. Applying credits. Salvage secured. Credits deposited.
Rather than pulling individual nanocarbon sections into the processor, we use the fact that the fuel lines connect all 4 sections to pull the entire side of the ship into the processor as one. While pulling the reactor from its housing, I accidentally clipped the hull section with my grapple's push module. This sparks a small explosion from a fuel line, but since we have already flushed the fuel lines and removed the fuel tanks, this is a non-issue.
Valuable object processed. Credits awarded.
Not to be mistaken for a hull panel, the cargo hatch is an easy bit of salvage that nets you quite a lot of money.
Secured. Account credit applied. Salvage registered. Transferring credits.
We now move on to the port crawl space, flushing the fuel lines as we go.
Salvage accepted. Credit applied.
I do a quick scan of the connected hull sections to make sure I've detached all the objects.
Processing object. Applying credits to account.
I look for a tether placement for the stern hull section, but I can't find one, so I'll leave it for later. With the port and starboard hull sections removed, we now look to remove the top and bottom hull panels. This will allow us to easily ferry objects from the ship to the barge.
Deposited. Salvage deposited. Salvage secured.
There are still many non-furnace objects attached to the inside of the hull, but removing them individually and barging them one by one is, in my opinion, not worth the time or the effort.
Processing valuable deposit. Credits.
It would be easy to tether the bow hull section directly into the processor, but surprisingly the glass that it contains is worth quite a lot of money, so we remove it. Anyone who played Hardspace before 1.0 will remember that this used to be a lot more difficult. I'm making sure to line myself up with the hull panels here so that my split saw doesn't remove material unnecessarily. And by muscle memory, I boost the glass we've just salvaged into the barge, but it's easily retrieved. To make the next process easy, I slowly and carefully orient the bridge facing down toward the barge. Working front to back, I detach and charged push each of the objects down into the barge. This is where a lot of the money of the ship can be found, so be careful not to destroy these objects. Do a scan for any remaining objects on the bridge and see that I've somehow left a fuel tank on the outside of the barge. I do several more scans to check that there's no material or objects remaining, but the salvage is complete and it's time to get paid. I used free play mode for demonstration in this video, but all the techniques I've shown are scalable to career mode.